Rapunzel. Once there lived a man and wife who wanted very much to have a child of their own, but year after year passed and they didn't have a baby. Often, the woman would sit sadly looking out of the window from which she could see the garden next door. Now, this garden was very beautiful, full of flowers and vegetables, but no one dared to enter it because it belonged to a witch. One day, as the woman looked out, she suddenly had a great longing to eat one of the lettuces growing below. "I feel as though I shall die if I do not have one of those delicious lettuces," she said to her husband, and she looked so pale and anxious that the poor man, much against his better judgment, agreed to go down and fetch her a lettuce. That evening, as it was getting dark, the man crept over the wall and hurried toward the vegetable garden. He was just about to cut a beautiful lettuce when a voice crackled through the twilight. "How dare you come into my garden and steal from me?" The husband nearly jumped out of his skin. It was the witch. Stuttering with fright, he explained about his wife's great craving for lettuce. "Very well," laughed the witch. "I'm not an unreasonable woman. You may take a lettuce if you will give me your firstborn child in return." The man was so frightened that he would have agreed to anything, and besides, he didn't think that it was very likely that he would have children now, so he mumbled his thanks, took the lettuce, and ran. But the strange thing was that only a few months later his wife gave birth to a beautiful baby daughter. Despite the pleadings of the mother and father, the witch made the man keep his promise. She took the child at once and gave her the name Rapunzel. The little girl grew quickly and became more lovely every day. The witch was very kind to her and treated her like her own child, except for one thing. When Rapunzel was 12 years old, the witch took her to a high tower and put her in a room at the very top. There was no door and no stairs, just a small window for Rapunzel to look out from. When the witch wished to visit, she stood at the bottom of the tower and called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." At this, the girl would lower her long braided hair from the window, and the witch would climb up. A few years later, a prince came riding past and heard a beautiful voice singing from the top of the tower. "Someone who's sure to find me soon." Puzzled, he hid behind some bushes and waited to see what would happen. Of course, before long, the witch visited Rapunzel in her usual way. As soon as the witch had gone, the prince came out of his hiding and called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Thinking that the witch had returned, Rapunzel did as she was asked. She was astonished to see a tall, handsome young man climbing through the high window instead. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I heard your beautiful singing and longed to see you for myself. Now I know that you're as lovely as your voice." The prince spoke kindly to the girl, and she grew to know him. As she grew to know him, she grew to love him. All went well until one day when the witch was visiting. As she climbed into the tower, Rapunzel spoke without thinking. "Why is it, mother dear, that you feel so much heavier than the prince does when he climbs up?" There was an awful silence. Then the witch flew into such a rage that the stones of the tower trembled. She took out some scissors and snipped off Rapunzel's long braid. With her magic powers, she banished the frightened girl to a desert far, far away. Then, as the sun went down, she crouched near the window and waited. Before long, a voice drifted up from below. "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." It was the prince. Carefully, the witch lowered the braid of hair out of the window. As the prince climbed into the room, she flew at him. "I wanted to keep my darling safe from such as you," she spat, and with a huge push, she hurled him to the ground. The prince fell like a stone into some bushes at the foot of the tower. He managed to stagger to his feet, but his eyes had been scratched by thorns, and he could not see at all. In darkness as black as his despairing thoughts, he stumbled away to a life of careless wandering. Years later, the prince came to the desert where Rapunzel was living. In the distance, he heard a sound he thought he would never hear again. It was the sweetest voice in the world, singing sadly. "Rapunzel!" cried the prince, running forward. The poor girl was so overjoyed that she covered his face with kisses and tears. As they fell onto the prince's eyes, the tears healed his wounds. Once more he could see the girl that he loved. The prince and Rapunzel returned to his kingdom, where they lived happily together for the rest of their days. The witch has never been heard of since, but it would be wise never to take as much as a petal the next time you visit a beautiful garden. The end.